Hello everyone, welcome. In this lecture, we're going to talk about footing with eccentric loading. We'll go through one simple example, and along the way, I'll introduce a few derived formulas that we'll use to compute for the maximum stress, internal shear, and bending moments. These values will help us later when checking for the thickness capacity and the required number of reinforcements. So let's dive in. Now, being here means you've already learned how to handle footing subjected only to axial loads. This concentric load condition means that the pressure under the soil is uniform throughout. On the other hand, when a footing carries additional bending moments, the solution becomes less straightforward, especially when those bending moments act along both horizontal axes. Before we start computing, let's first establish the standard direction of bending moments. Just like forces, directions matter, including whether the value is positive or negative. Remember that in general, rotations and bending moments follow the right-hand rule. As your thumb points to the positive direction of the axis, the curl of your fingers will indicate the positive direction of rotation and moment. So then, let's recall how loads are transferred to the foundation. When only an axial force acts on the column, the soil underneath resists it uniformly. This means that the stress at the bottom of the footing is also uniformly distributed. We can compute that stress as P over the area of the footing slab. Now, if a bending moment is also applied to the support, the footing will tend to rotate following the direction of that moment. This causes one side of the footing to press harder against the soil, while the other side slightly lifts up. The result is a linearly varying compressive stress on one side and tension on the other. The formula for the stress at any point in the slab is m times c over I. So for moment about the z-axis, we write it as mz times cx over iz. The same behavior happens for moment about the x-axis, but this time in the perpendicular direction. The stress can be expressed as mx times cz over ix. When we combine all three components, the axial force and the two bending moments, we get the generalized stress equation. In using this formula, remember to mark the bending moments with the correct positive or negative sign depending on their direction. Let's look into this in more detail. From our previous discussion, we know that the extreme stresses occur at the farthest edges of the slab. Since the origin is at the center of the footing, the values of C sub x and C sub z are simply 1/2 of bx and bz respectively. We can also represent the bending moments as the product of the axial force and the corresponding eccentricities. After substituting and simplifying, we can factor out common terms such as the axial force and slab dimensions on both axes. This gives us another form of the generalized stress equation, now expressed in terms of eccentricity. Let's get deeper into the derivation. If we set the stress equal to 0, and consider only the negative side of 6e over b, we can classify the types of stress the footing experiences. If the sum of 6e over b is greater than 1, the footing develops tension or pull-out pressure. When 6e over b equals 1, the stress at the extreme edge becomes 0, and when 6e over b is less than 1, it means the entire footing remains in compression. For most favorable condition, we prefer that our footing behaves as a full compression footing. With that established, let's now explore some of the other derived formulas. We'll start with punching shear. Regardless of whether the loading is concentric, uniaxial, or biaxial, the formula for punching shear demand remains the same. The shear demand is equal to the ultimate axial load minus the reduction in stress acting along the critical perimeter of the footing. Now, beam shear behaves a little differently. Since the stress varies linearly along both x and z directions, we'll use integration to handle these variations. Remember that force is pressure times area. So the differential shear can be expressed as pressure formula times the differential area. We replace the differential area with dx times dz, giving us two variables of integration. After performing double integration and simplifying, we get a formula for shear in terms of the limits x1, x2, z1, z2, the dimensions bx and bz, and the forces pu, mux, and muz. This derived formula applies for beam shear along both the x and z directions. Here is how the stress distribution looks when applied at the bottom of the footing. And here is how it appears when the stress is isolated. In the illustration, we locate the position of the critical sections for beam shear. And to use the formula, we substitute the values of compressive force and bending moment and identify the limits x1, x2, z1, and z2. Take note that the signs of these distances are very important, as they determine the direction of shear. We can repeat the same process for any beam shear section. By cutting the footing along the perpendicular direction, we can apply the same formula to find the shear demand at that particular critical section. Now, let's talk about bending moments. To derive the equation for biaxial bending, recall that the base formula for moment is force times distance. Consider a small differential strip near the critical section perpendicular to the x-axis. The differential moment is equal to the pressure, Q, times the differential area, dA, multiplied by the moment arm, which is x minus x1. The differential area can be replaced with dx times dz. Since there are two variables, we perform double integration with limits x1 to x2 and z1 to z2. The resulting moment gives us the expression for mux. Doing the same along the z-axis gives a similar equation for muz. After performing the integration, we arrive at the complete expressions for both. If the stress distribution is in full compression and no tension occurs in any part of the slab, we can make further simplifications. For example, z2 minus z1 represents the full width along the z-axis, while z2 plus z1 becomes 0. Substituting these relationships simplifies the formula significantly. We can apply the same simplification to mux as well. This helps make the overall computation faster and more straightforward. Finally, by putting them all together, we obtain the equations for muz and mux, which we'll use to compute the bending moments for biaxial loading. I guess we are ready to solve our sample problem. Let us read the problem first. Design a rectangular footing carrying the following loads. Axial dead load of 510 kN, axial live load is 100 kN. The dead load moment about the x-axis is 80 kN-meter and live load moment about the x-axis is equal to 40 kN-meter. Dead load moment about the x-axis and live load moment about the z-axis are equal to 60 kN-meter and 20 kN-meter respectively. The recommendation of the geotechnical engineer is that the soil bearing capacity is 130 kPa at a depth of 1.4 meter. Aside from these, other parameters must also be considered, such as the compressive strength of concrete, the yield strength of steel reinforcement, the diameter of the rebars, soil parameters, and most importantly, the design criteria for determining the footing dimensions. Understand that the 1.5 times factor for the footing dimensions is rarely used in actual design practice. In most real projects, when a footing is rectangular, we usually set one of its dimensions as constant and adjust only the other to satisfy the bearing capacity requirement. The given ratio here is simply a contrived parameter, meant only for sample purposes, so we can demonstrate the process clearly and complete the derivation in a straightforward way. Shown in this slide is the list of all the given values that we will refer to throughout our calculation process. These include the applied loads, material properties, soil parameters, and the assumed geometric criteria for the footing. Keep this list in mind as we proceed with the computations in the next slides. Also from the given information, the column dimensions are 400 mm and 300 mm, corresponding to C sub x and C sub z, respectively. These values will be important later when we define the critical sections for shear and bending moment calculations. We now begin our calculation. The first step is to assume the slab thickness. Let's start with a small value of 250 mm. Using this, we can compute for the depth of soil denoted as d sub s. After that, we'll determine the net soil bearing capacity. Once these are known, we'll proceed to solve for the allowable load combinations for both the axial force and the bending moments. Once we have the allowable loads, we'll use them to compute the eccentricity along both the x-axis and the z-axis. Since we have all that we need, we can now build the equation for the actual soil pressure using the modified general form of the stress equation. Moving forward, by plugging all known parameters, including the dimension factor of 1.5, and by assuming the actual stress equals the net soil-bearing capacity, the algebra simplifies. With that assumption, the only remaining unknown is dimension Bx, which we can now solve for directly, using trial and error approach, or using the shift-solve function of any standard engineering calculators. With that said, the computed value of Bx is 3.84 meter, or if rounded up it becomes 3.9 meter. We will use that same value to compute dimension Bz, which evaluates to 2.6 meter. Keep in mind that the assumed concrete thickness of 250 mm plays a role in determining these footing dimensions. If in the later steps, the footing fails in shear or flexure checks, we may need to revise this thickness. Any change in thickness can slightly affect the computed soil pressure and the resulting footing dimensions, so adjustments might be necessary as we go along. Moving forward, let us check whether the stresses at the bottom of the footing slab are all under compression. First, we solve for the ultimate load combination of the axial and bending loads, and after that we compute the eccentricities based on those computed loads. Next, we compute the summation of the values of 6e over b. For this example, the result is 0.693, which is less than 1, so we can conclude that the footing is under pure compression at the ultimate load condition. So here is how it looks if we visualize the stress underneath the footing. And here is the stress if the footing is hidden in view. Let us now check for punching shear. We begin by computing the effective depth. For punching shear, we assume that the effective depth is measured at the center of the crossing reinforcement bars. This means we deduct the full diameter of the rebar from the total slab thickness, along with the clear concrete cover. Using the computed depth and the previously established punching shear formula, we can now determine the demand shear, which comes out to be a little over 700 kilonewtons. For comparison, we compute the actual shear capacity of the slab using the formula recommended by the code. The result is less than 400 kilonewtons, which, when compared with the actual shear force, indicates that the capacity is insufficient. This means the initially assumed thickness of the slab is also not adequate. We can't proceed unless we address the failing shear capacity. So, let's increase the thickness to about 400 millimeters. Take note that this is essentially an iterative process. If we were aiming for the most economical section, we would typically use smaller increments, like 50 millimeters, starting from 300. But for this example, we'll go straight to 400 millimeters, which can be considered a matter of design judgment. Even after increasing the thickness, the change in the footing dimensions is actually minimal and almost negligible, because of rounding. So basically, the dimensions remain the same. With the updated thickness, the computed punching shear capacity is about 900 kilonewtons, which is higher than the 700 kilonewtons demand. We can therefore say that this slab thickness is safe in terms of punching shear. We'll also check for beam shear, starting with the x direction just to be sure. As we know, the longer rebars which run along the x-axis are assumed to be placed at the bottom. So the effective depth is simply the slab thickness minus the concrete cover and half of the bar diameter. We are now ready to use the derived formula for beam shear. To use the formula, we'll first need to determine the limits x1, x2, z1, and z2. These limits are defined by the dimensions of the effective area beyond the critical section. If we plug in all the known values, the computed demand shear comes out to be about 320 kilonewtons. When we compare this with the code recommended shear capacity of 470 kilonewtons, we can confirm that the slab is safe for shear along the x direction. We can also perform the same beam shear check along the z-axis. After going through the same process, the results show that the footing is safe in that direction as well. So overall, both directions satisfy the shear requirements, which means our section is performing quite well. Let's now move on to computing the demand bending moment, starting with MUZ. We'll use the same effective depth that we used earlier when checking beam shear along the x direction, with the critical section taken at the face of the column. To use the derived formula, we first need to determine the limits x1, x2, z1, and z2. These limits represent the boundaries of the effective area beyond the critical section. Once those are known, we can substitute all the parameters into the equation and carry out the calculation. Doing so gives us the value of MUZ. After that, we'll follow the same process to find MUX. Now let's use the computed MU for a typical beam design check. The first step is to check whether the slab strip can be treated as a singly reinforced beam. We then solve for the required reinforcement ratio, ρ, using MU, the effective depth, and the material strengths. From ρ, we calculate the required steel area AS as ρ times the effective width times the effective depth. Next, we compare the computed AS with two minimum reinforcement requirements, one based on the beam provision and the other based on the slab provision. We take the larger of the two as the governing minimum. If the computed area of bar is less than this value, we adopt the governing minimum area of bar. Finally, using the governing area of bar, we determine the number of bars by dividing total area by the area of one bar and rounding up to a practical whole number. Then we adjust the layout for spacing and cover. At the end, we summarize whether the section is singly reinforced, the governing ρ, the final AS, and the chosen number and spacing of bars. Now we move on to computing the demand bending moment along the x direction, MUX. We use the same approach as before, starting with the effective depth. Determine the limits x1, x2, z1, and z2 for the critical section along this axis. After substituting these limits and all known parameters into the formula, we can solve for the value of MUX. With MUX known, we proceed to the reinforcement check for the x direction. First, solve for the required reinforcement ratio, ρ, and compute the steel area, AS. Compare the total rebar area with the two minimum reinforcement requirements from the beam and slab provisions, and use the larger one as the governing minimum. Check if the section qualifies as singly reinforced. Finally, determine the number of bars needed and adjust for proper spacing and cover. Next, since the footing is rectangular, we must compute the rebar allocation for the center band of the slab. The leading calculation produces 21 rebars at the center band and 3 bars on each sides beyond the center band, which makes the total rebar requirement for z-axis to be 27 rebars. We are basically done with the computation, and the only thing left to do is to produce the illustration of the results of our computation. I guess that's it for now. With that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.